So this will be our volume 1 of Hyrule Times, and what I want to talk about specifically, because you guys were all in the press at the time, you know, sort of the road to The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. I mean, because, you know, at that time, I still remember picking up EGM religiously. I actually still have the issue that has Link pulling the Master Sword out. I meant to bring it and forgot.
The Hyrule Tattler, or what was the name of the
it was
in-game fiction?
Style.
I think tabloid
what it
style.
was,
That was a great way of presenting all the stuff. There was so much to talk about with Ocarina of Time.
Yeah.
And then it just chose this like tabloid format for like. There's something in there about chickens. I forget, but it was a nice little presentation. Friend of the show, Christian Boyer.
You can tell,
Shout out.
in the same boat, right? You had to come up with some way to talk about things that, almost like what Famitsu does, where they have a bunch of screenshots and they get no information. And so
that was that era.
How will you wrap this up for the audience?
Right. Right.
All right, so let's get into it. Like, what do you remember from that time, like leading up to Zelda Ocarina of Time, a game that like is a masterpiece, right? It's still considered the 10 out of 10 sort of game.
Absolutely, yeah. Was that the first platinum in EGM history that got all 10s?
It was that or Metal Gear. I think they were like a month apart from each other too, so I don't remember
Metal
which
Gear
game first.
I think Metal Gear did come out like a month earlier.
It did
that
get all 10s.
That was right when I came into the press, but you had been at EGM and you went to Space World where it was first shown?
I got to play the first ever playable version of that game at Space World. I want to say 97. Well, it came out in 98, right? So it must have been 97. Yeah, and at the time, it had already been delayed a couple times, but it was due to come out the following April. So this was before it got delayed again, if you guys remember. It got delayed a number of times. And I got to play the playable demo. And actually, for some anniversary recently, I went and dug up the article that I had written. I had to find the Internet Archive because the site that I wrote for was like videogames.com, which doesn't even exist anymore. That was like pre-GameSpot. Yeah. And that was like a long time ago. And I found this. No, it wasn't Nuke, not quite that far. It was whatever EGM's like associated site was at the time. We had changed, a few times. And but I found it and it had a really thorough I'll send you a link later. I read a really thorough kind of walkthrough of the demo. But
do you remember what areas they showed back then? I'm trying to remember if I played that one.
I should have read it before I came on here. But there was 3 types of demos. There was like a dungeon demo where you fought I think Dodongo, and then there was like a field demo, and then there was like one other demo. I don't remember if it was town or what. They gave like 3 different experiences of the game.
Was it the rotating town? The
I honestly, it was either that or just the main village that you go to by Death Mountain. I forget.
Kakariko.
I forget at this point which one it was.
I remember I think the first thing I played was the Dodongo fight. That sequence where you run away and then throw the bombs and everything.
That was one of the 3 things on there.
For sure. And I'm trying to remember because it all blurs together when it's like
it does. It really
that
does.
long ago. But also I remember before we got to actually play it. You just poured over every screenshot that came out, and there was a screenshot of Link obtaining the Triforce.
Yeah,
right?
Well, and
which never even happened in the game.
Earlier, remember that there was super early movies. I mean, I remember watching early internet, this big postage stamp sized video, waiting 10 minutes for it to download, and then seeing like 15 seconds of, and at the time completely blowing my mind just because it was polygons, but even compared to what it finally ended up being, I mean, it looked like garbage.
It was super
like flat
early.
shaded polygons, just all but a bunch of triangles. Like
so there's the Dark Knights, the like heavy guys, right? The guys. There was a short scene of him clashing with Link. Link looks really bad.
Yes.
And that guy looks like Metal Mario. He's got that same
but
effect
again,
on
at
him.
the time, like now, you can look at it. At the time, I was just
metal.
like, what? I mean, I was literally like the whole screen was an inch tall, so Link was like a half an inch tall.
It felt like a lot of anything that used metal that was a polygon. It was like show off that reflection.
No, it had that N64 like Silicon Graphics effect on it. They used that wherever they could. Like water, they would do it sometimes.
It just looked like a bunch of triangles blocked together.
And it was a look that was more like the Zelda 2 Link, not the one that we got. Specifically like the hair and the way it
nose and everything.
Yeah, and ears and all that.
And then there was another screenshot that showed the Dark Forest with like polygonal trees and a Poe flying around, which never made it into the game. But like when I saw that screenshot, I'm like, oh my god, they can create an entire forest filled with trees, and you'll be walking through it for 30 minutes. And they probably thought that too, right?
Or we can make walls and paint trees on them.
Exactly.
But
and hope for the best.
Exactly.
But the Triforce chamber had water in it. You guys remember it had like the water reflections on the walls.
It was kind of like, in a way, they were showing the technology and what could happen with the game, but not really what actually did. But I did remember very distinctly that Zelda 2 vibe. That made me very happy as a big Zelda 2 fan, because even like I don't remember if it was a screenshot. It must have been. It wasn't a video, I don't think, of like Link walking, and there were like tall buildings on both sides.
Yes.
And it looked very much like he was walking through a Zelda 2 town. You know,
it was
like,
a big town. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just like, yeah, this is what I got me really excited for the game.
And if you remember, that time was also, you know, like when the early stuff for the N64 came out, nobody knew exactly the power of the machine.
Right.
You know, and even when Super Mario 64 was already playable, I think a lot of developers didn't have a handle on yet, like how, you know, kind of fill rate, how can you develop something that runs smoothly. And another demo that was very much like Zelda was the 3D Goemon game, the first one.
Oh,
so you guys remember that
yep.
one?
Oh, yeah,
right?
Of course. Yeah.
And that game, they showed a trailer, and it was so gorgeous. It was freaking amazing. And you could tell Konami wanted to make that, and then started developing and said, oops, you can't do any of that.
So this
stuff.
was like a target render, which is what we slowly became to realize these were called.
And then, of course, the final game that came out, I think, doesn't get enough credit, because it
was a fun game.
It beat Zelda, and it was basically Zelda. They built a Zelda game with explorable areas, but it just struggled under the weight of what it was trying to do.
Those poor Quest 64 guys were just like,
Quest 64.
we dreamed the dream that will never happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was also the time we saw Final Fantasy screenshots, right? Remember the really kind of simple, super
Final Fantasy
characters.
7. Yeah.
And so, you know, everything we saw then in screenshots was really exciting. And then once you got a sense of what Mario played like, you kind of put two and two together, and you said, oh my God, if they can pull off Mario in the Zelda universe, like something that feels that fluid, and like you have full control, and we all thought Link was going to be able to jump, right?
Well, except for the jumping, right? I was going to bring that up, actually.
So.
When you heard that the idea that jumping would be just when you're running off a ledge, it automatically jumps, that was just heresy at the time. It was just like, what are you...
How could you do that?
Yeah,
so
that's going to ruin it. Yeah, that's totally awful. And then total non-issue, even among like super fans, the second that you actually played it yourself.
But it's funny because, I mean, jumping was not a staple element of most of the Zelda games, right? Like you had
Zelda
it in 2.
Zelda 2,
You had it in 2, and you know, you had upgrades that let you do stuff.
And then there was
being in 3D and after Mario too, it was just like, how are you going to navigate this 3D world?
And Link's
when you can't
Awakening
even jump?
had jumping as well, like that. But the portable games always took risks and tried like weird things. But I do want to point out, I read that in an issue of EGM, and I was like, what? Like I still remember just
burning the magazine.
He can't jump. These are the people who made Mario, and he jumps. How does this make sense?
There was a controversy on message boards too, early message boards that ran on gas still, and people were as upset as over, you know, an all-female Ghostbusters or something.
Right. Yeah, I remember the other thing. This was more of positive, I think, right from the start. Though was Z targeting.
Yeah,
remember Z targeting, the Z trigger on the back of the
sold us in
old N64.
Yeah,
it's basically just lock-on targeting, but like at the time, 3D games were still in such infancy that Nintendo was really like paving the way with that, and that just became like, you know, common knowledge immediately.
So that was one of the things I wrote about in that article from Space World, because that was one of the things they were trying to show off in their dungeon demo, was like how the Z targeting works and how it's a big deal. And it immediately was like, combat is amazing in this game. Like, and you just knew it right off the bat. It was going to be huge.
Like the Stalfos, Lizalfos battles, like you, and the enemies also blocked, right? They didn't just give you a simple battle. They kind of amped it up and really had the enemies react to you.
Yeah, and
like,
that's
the moment you played it, you're like, all right, I'm sold on this game.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, and that's something that I feel has changed over the course of the series. Where like you look at Wind Waker or Twilight Princess, it wasn't until Skyward Sword that I felt like enemies were the average enemy was a problem, like a thing that was hard to sort of fight or find a way to solve the puzzle to beat them. I felt like in Twilight it was a little easier, and Wind Waker the same.
Well, Wind Waker I thought hinted at some of the most interesting combat in the series.
I think so too. No question.
Sidestepping and slicing off the armor and stuff like that, and I wanted them to go further. The average enemy, you're right, was not like that, but it hinted at what I thought was super interesting combat. Yeah. I never saw them take that ball and kind of run with it.
Yeah, and I remember, just to jump to Wind Waker for a second, but in EGM, you guys had a poster that had like all your tips for Wind Waker, and it had like this flow chart of everything. It was either in the issue itself or in the poster itself, but it was a flow chart of everything you can do as basically the Wind Waker Link, and he was so powerful. Like take every rupee, take everything from him first, then cut him down the side, take his weapon.
That was,
I remember I annoyed the living heck out of this man because we did a Let's Play together, and he's like, "Just kill it." And I'm like, "No, I need
Stop torturing the poor guy.
Yeah, I need everything he has first, and then we will take him out."
But it was such a, I mean, that was such an entertaining element, right? It's like kind of the meta game, like. We all played Mario 64. When we ran somewhere, we didn't run, we jumped.
Yeah.
We did, Yahoo.
Yeah, exactly.
Yahoo, slide, yeah, right? And like in Zelda, it was literally like walking around swinging that damn thing and stealing your necklaces.
But you play Ocarina today, and you still have plenty of enemies that you have to wait for an opening. You have to stay and block and wait for a chance to then swing at them. And some people say, well, that hasn't aged great. I think in some ways it has aged better than some of the other parts of Zelda's combat. And granted, it's gotten better. I don't want to make it sound like, well, Ocarina did it best and no one else. Like, that's not my point. But I miss that edge to there's a certain way you fight this guy. And I think in Twilight Princess you got there eventually. There was like the dark nuts near the end where it's like, if you're not slicing off every piece of armor, you're not fighting this guy the right way, and he's going to tear you apart.
Yeah, and you know, I had cool elements like you want to lead them to smash the pillars to get hearts and stuff. But I mean, you can see the foresight in this game that they wanted to give you so much variety in combat that you could map things to the C buttons, right? The yellow buttons. I mean, I think that it took a lot for Nintendo to say, we're giving up camera control entirely in this game after they worked so much on Mario 64, and then instead give you this variety of ways of attacking. Because you could fight somebody with a sword and quickly switch to a boomerang or another weapon in Ocarina of Time to kind of like, as you progress and get more items,
right?
An enemy that you might have to spend more time for in the beginning, like you don't have to do that. You can just go quickly stun them and do something.
Yeah, and the guy who gets the credit for Z targeting, according to legend, because I don't know if he's ever actually said it, is Yoshiaki Koizumi. They say that he was the dude who sort of helped come up with that system of,
he's
hey,
one
lock
of their
on.
best designers. I mean, he's the Mario Galaxy games. He's like the director of like some of their best stuff. I mean, I want him to make a Zelda game someday.
Me too.
No, I love Aonuma and I love the Zelda team, but I just think it would be so cool to see the team that, you know, evolved the Mario 64 into Mario Galaxy to kind of evolve Zelda into just whatever their vision of Zelda.
Well, and he's worked on some of their most interesting Zeldas. I mean, Link's Awakening and also Majora's Mask were like big time. Koizumi had a role in either planning or story, and I feel like a lot of his ideas really show in those games. And then, you know, clearly Aonuma took the series in his own direction, and it's not a bad direction. But I've always kind of, in my heart, hoped Koizumi would come back to work on a Zelda. But it doesn't seem to be the case. He's the Mario steward instead.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, I love that he has time to think about like game systems like that can change things forever, because Z-targeting did change things. Like game developers did not think about the need in third-person games to create this lock-on. It was all about, oh yeah, the camera is behind the character. It's almost like a first-person shooter. Where you point is where you look.
Right.
And he basically said, no, what matters is this one character, and I'm going to lock onto him. And when they first showed that, every developer said, oh yeah, okay.
Exactly.
And they started changing the game. So when you go back to like 1997 and you look at the early 3D games, you'll see something really important missing.
Well, and he's a storyteller. I mean, his first job for a Zelda-related project was the art in the manual for Kamigami no Triforce, for A Link to the Past.
Wow.
That was Koizumi's like first thing he ever worked on with them. And then he grew into another role, clearly. And that's something that you sometimes see a lot over there. Like, I think another example is Kento Motokura, the guy who was the co-director on 3D World, also came from art. And he is now co-directing, you know, a Mario game. And presumably he's on the next one. Like, I mean, we don't know, you know, because he hasn't, at least whatever he's working on hasn't been public since. Anyway, but yeah, so then Z-targeting, but what else is there that sort of comes back into your mind, like outside of the jumping, outside of like leading up to it? And if not, and we've hit the ceiling on that, like then when the game came out, like let's talk about that, right?
The review event.
You were there, right? I was there.
Is it Julius Castle or something here in San Francisco, right?
It was that was I might have been to the preview event. I went to Seattle to Nintendo's offices. They did this thing, and this was the first time they've done this a lot since then. But at the time, this was the first time they'd done this, where they sat you down with the game for like 6 or 8 hours and like just let you play as much as you could in that time, and then just to get like as much out of the game. And they did this like treasure hunt thing through Seattle. Like they took people around to like find, cheesy items or whatever. It was like supposed to be like a Zelda thing or whatever. But
I remember the treasure hunt. I thought that was here. Maybe there were 2 events because you guys were print.
That's true.
And so you had the lead time. You probably had an earlier one.
You're probably right. Yeah.
Yeah. That was an incredibly cheesy treasure hunt where a dude was standing in the middle of San Francisco dressed up as a wizard.
Right. We have plenty of that already.
I have this wonderful picture of Casa Messina next to just talking like nonchalantly with this wizard. And there was a guy in like knight's armor too. Like they really tried to like take it out into the real world and entertain you. When of course all we were thinking about is
just let me play this stupid game.
This damn game.
That was a pretty magical experience too, though, because that was for me, not the wizard. The wizard definitely was magical for a lot of reasons. No, but the playing the game pretty much done. I had played that early version at Space World and then hadn't really played it since then. So then playing the game that was kind of almost finished and actually just getting to like really experience the beginning of the game was very cool.
Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Are you serious? I just asked. I can't reach it. I don't want to reach across the table.
Another cranky cat?
For those listening, Pear just threw a water on the floor rather than give it to me.
All right.
I didn't mean to interrupt. So magical experience.
No, I like how they're all quiet. They're like, what's going on?
That was obviously before, and then the game came out. I mean, I don't know. I distinctly remember reviewing the game for EGM and playing the crap out of it. But we also, and I've talked about this before. Actually, I don't know if you guys have ever talked about Back in My Play. It's a podcast by Kevin Larrabee, a friend of ours, who just plays old retro games, talks about them. And we talked a bunch about Ocarina of Time on an episode. Nice. In the past at one point. But after you listen to this, obviously, you should go and take a listen to that as well for some more stories. But I distinctly remember getting a copy of the gold cart. They sent it in this like treasure chest, which I still have, this like silver hefty treasure chest that you would open up with the N64 logo on it, and it had the cart in it. This may have been a print-only thing. I don't know if it was.
have that chest.
You have it too? Okay. And
I sleep in it.
And I still have the chest and the cart. So we got it like maybe 2 weeks early. But that was just great too, just to be able to kind of play the game unfiltered. The internet wasn't as big of a kind of a nuisance as far as like spoiling stuff then as it is now. But even so, to be able to play through it kind of pure without nobody could really help you except for like other press people, which we didn't really talk much back then. Yeah. So like to be able to play the game kind of unfiltered and pure was really awesome experience.
And that happened all the time. I mean, I remember a couple of N64 games where we were stuck on something and there was just nothing that you could do, right? You just had to go back and figure it out. So our review event was in San Francisco, Julius Castle. Okay. It's like a restaurant up here. I think Nintendo frantically looked through San Francisco landmarks and tried to find something with castle in it, or like Hyrule, castle, right?
White Castle.
And so it was you had a view of the city up there, which none of us, of course, looked at because we wanted to play the game. And so you sat there. Miyamoto was walking around, and a couple of other folks were there from Japan, watching everything you were doing. I mean, it's like, it is not my preferred experience with a game. I don't want somebody looking over my shoulder.
The creator
and
of the game looking over your shoulder.
Me when I'm failing to lock on to an enemy.
That happened to me on Star Fox Zero. Miyamoto's in the room, and I'm just like, oh my God, if I fly into something, what am I going to say? That's pressure.
It adds some pressure, but to the game's credit, you quickly forgot that there was anybody else there. And then you also didn't want to see the other players. Like, you didn't want to hear like, do-do-do-do-do-do next to you and go, oh, God. I wanted to figure that out. And
that's right.
We were trying to play as much of the game as possible. It may have been a preview event, not a review event, now that I think about it.
And they still do those preview events for even current Zeldas. I feel like with Skyward, I remember Jeremy going to an event and playing for like 6 hours straight, coming back, writing a bunch of previews up, and then we got the game later and we were able to then review it, which I got to do, and it was incredible. But still, like, I could only imagine, again, that race of like, I don't want to know, I want to make sure I get through this. And it was such a magical game, right? Like, it really was.
You heard people go like, holy crap, next to you. Like, whenever you got something, or when somebody got the horse, everybody's like, he's got the horse, he's got the horse.
Nice. Yeah.
No, it was very, very special, and we had, since we had poured over this game, Hyrule Times, like over every screenshot and every theory. When you then play it and you realize there's so much more in it, but you also realize that some of the things that you thought were in it had disappeared, it made for a really interesting experience.
So if I can ask, was the existence of Young Link not known until that demo at Space World? Like, I feel like I never saw anything about that until after what I would presume to be those previews.
If you had asked me this question at one point in the last 15 years, I could have given you a concrete answer, but I honestly don't remember anymore. I do remember that it was a big deal when it got revealed. I don't know if you guys remember when it happened. I don't. But I know, like, when that first came out, we were kind of all blown away because I forget if it was that we knew it was young and we didn't know there was an older one, or if we thought it was older and we didn't know about the young one. But we didn't know about one of them.
I remember writing an article, something like Link will grow up in Ocarina of Time, or whatever it was called, Legend of Zelda 64, right?
Right.
I remember, like, that leaked out through a Japanese magazine or something. Link will grow up, but we didn't know what to make of that. That's like Peter Molyneux saying the trees will grow, right? Like, what is he, like, when you level up? Is it like Zelda 2? And, like, we didn't know. I don't remember, like, the exact moment where we saw for the first time that there are two Link models. But that was definitely a big deal.
Yeah, I think just lastly, before we wrap and then we just move on to one more topic and we call it a day, is that I think the thing that blows me away is every time I go back to it, the amount of confidence they had in the dungeon design. Like, you have that first, the one inside the Deku Tree, and then as you move forward, once you become Adult Link and you go to the Forest Temple, like, the rules are completely changed. You are, like, backtracking. You are, like, searching for keys, and it's a puzzle to be solved with twisting corridors and things that, I don't know, it amazes me how timeless some of that stuff has been design-wise, despite the facelift that it got, because it got a pretty major one when they re-released it on 3DS.
Yeah, and I would say focus is a big deal, because they didn't just introduce a new gameplay element and then repeat it, right? Like, you didn't get a dungeon where then you untwist the corridors. They gave each place something very, very special and specific, right? Obviously, you have, like, the water temple and the fire temple themes, but, like, the puzzle design, like, really differed, and you learned more and more as you progress. I just thought, I mean, like, how often do you get the luxury of game designers sitting down and really kind of mapping out this quest? And,
right.
I think this game did it so well.
Yeah, it was the whole package. I mean, moving the kind of Zelda-style dungeon into 3D, and it just nailed it right from the first time, where it's like you can't even now imagine it really any other way. Every other Zelda since then has really just been iterating on and perfecting, that kind of, I mean, it's the same mechanic that the old games had too, like finding the keys and then the master key and then the item per the dungeon, and the dungeon kind of teaches you to use the item and that sort of thing. But yeah, like having to go into first person every once in a while for certain things, and like, there were really interesting elements and interesting use of the 3D. You could almost see the designers, same way as in Mario 64, kind of experimenting and coming to grips with what it meant to then now be able to be in 3D, to be able to shoot and aim arrows and aim the boomerang and do things like that.
And Phantom Ganon, right? Like, that's the one that everyone was like.
By that time, they taught you how to aim and to expect, like, this battle that goes in 360. But the very first dungeon, the Deku Tree, do you remember you step into this thing and it goes, and then the camera, like, goes up and it, like, shows you everything everywhere.
That's right.
And, like, basically just says, this is not just about what's in front of you.
Right.
You gotta look around. You gotta figure this out.
Yeah.
And they do it without a word. They do it without a hey, listen, right? Like, they just show it to you, which was
That's
really
true.
cool.
That is interesting that the very first dungeon has that huge vertical element to it, which is like, obviously,
floors.
Hey, we're in 3D now. And like, you're gonna be going up.
And the exit is right where you are. It's the spider web. You gotta
right, and then it ends up going back down.
Which and that was cool. Actually asking a lot of the audience. Like that you gotta figure out to get up there, jump down.
Well, they did a good job of, like, having the camera sort of hint at you where you should be looking or what you should be thinking about.
Right.
I think that game, I've told this story before, but I just like to tell it because it's really my strongest memory of that game. Is the first time that I got to the Forest Temple. I was really deep into the game. It was like Thanksgiving break, and I was just, like, at home in my room, like, not leaving the room, playing the game all day. First time I got to the Forest Temple, the atmosphere of those dungeons, especially when you became an adult and got to, like, the real dungeons, was so strong that I had this moment where I forgot that I was playing the game. Like, I just was, like, so absorbed that, like, I had this, like, moment where it was, like, I popped back out. You know, I was like, oh, my God, I forgot. I'm, like, so into this, so absorbed. And, I mean, you look at it now and you're like, well, whatever.
Right,
but back then, it was, like,
sure.
the thing, you know? And that was, like, to me, just, like, the ultimate, like, compliment to the game design, I think. Like, that you can make something that could have you feel that immersed in it, you know?
Yeah,
it was magical.
Yeah,
Use that word again.
Yeah, you absolutely forget, you know, your place in the real living room when you're playing it. But then once in a while, when you pause and you step away, you realize, like, all the little game systems and elements that went into pulling that off. Just like, think about it. You enter a room, they do two things. They orient the camera behind you, so you know, oh, the door that I came through is behind me, right? Like, remember, it's got this 3D perspective. So, like, in Mario was different. Like, you might walk into a room and, like, the camera is in a different angle, but they do these little subtle camera orientation tricks. Then on the map, they mark where you came in, right? Like, they show you all, they give you all this help to find your way through a 3D space, which was not something we did in games.
You take it for granted now, but they really had to think all that stuff through, and exactly.
Yeah, no, totally. All right, well, thank you very much for you know, kind of digging back into history there.